You're standing in the cold morning mist outside a decaying villa near Rome. It's June 9th, 68 AD. The sun is barely rising. The air smells like fear, damp earth, and desperation. Inside, through a broken wooden door, you can hear the voice of the most powerful man in the world, a man once worshipped, feared, and obeyed, crying like a scared child. His voice, once trained to sing for thousands, now shakes as he repeats the same line again and again. What an artist dies in me. This is Nero, Emperor of Rome, and this is how his story ends, not on a battlefield, not in a palace, but hiding in a servant's small home, too afraid to even kill himself. But how did such a powerful man fall this low? To understand, we need to go back to the beginning, back to a boy born into blood and ambition. On December 15th, 37 AD, a baby was born in the seaside town of Antium. The sky was bright that morning. Some Romans later said the light was a sign of the fire he would bring. His birth name was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. His family had power and cruelty running deep in their blood. His great-great-grandfather rode into Gaul with the heads of his enemies tied to his chariot. His grandfather once gouged out a Roman nobleman's eye in the middle of the forum. His father was so hateful that when friends congratulated him on the birth of his son, he replied, "Nothing good could come from me and Agrippina." That woman, Agrippina the Younger, was Nero's mother, and she was the most dangerous woman in Rome. She was the sister of Emperor Caligula and great-granddaughter of Augustus. She had already been exiled once for plotting against her brother. She had buried a husband under suspicious circumstances. And now she had one goal: to make her son emperor. When Lucius was just 3 years old, his father died. Some said poison, others said illness. Either way, the boy inherited a third of the family fortune, but then Caligula took everything. Agrippina was banished again, and Lucius was left with only 2 servants, a dancer and a barber. Hardly the upbringing of a future emperor. But Agrippina was not a woman who stayed down for long. When Caligula was killed in 41 AD, her uncle Claudius became emperor. She seduced her way back into the halls of power. First, she married one of the richest men in Rome. He conveniently died, and she took his wealth. Then, she did the unthinkable. She set her sights on Emperor Claudius himself. There was one problem. Claudius already had a wife, Messalina, known across Rome for her endless sexual affairs. But Messalina made a fatal mistake. She married her lover while still married to the emperor. Whether it was a drunken joke or a coup attempt, no one knows. But Claudius had her killed, and Agrippina made her move. Claudius was old, slow, and easily manipulated. He was also Agrippina's uncle, but Roman law didn't matter to emperors. In 49 AD, Lucius watched his mother become Empress of Rome, Agrippina, then convinced Claudius to adopt her son. Lucius was renamed Nero Claudius Caesar at 13. Nero became a man by Roman tradition. At 14, he was named heir to the empire above Claudius's own son, Britannicus. At 15, he married Claudius's daughter, Octavia, making him both son and soon-in-law to the emperor. The path to power was complete, but Agrippina didn't want to wait. In 54 AD, Claudius sat down to dinner and never stood up again. The official story said food poisoning from mushrooms, but everyone in Rome knew Agrippina had killed him. Some say the poison didn't work fast enough, so she brought in a woman named Locusta, known poisoner who finished the job by pushing a poisoned feather down the emperor's throat under the excuse of helping him vomit. Claudius died in agony, and Nero, just 17 years old, became emperor of the Roman world. At first, Nero seemed like a kind ruler. He refused to sign death warrants. He lowered taxes. He gave gifts to the people and said he would rule like Augustus. People had hope. But behind the curtain, things were already turning dark. His tutor, Seneca, later wrote that teaching Nero felt like reliving the nightmare of Caligula, and soon Nero showed why. He began planning his first murder, his stepbrother, Britannicus. The boy was only 14 and quiet, with no desire for power, but Nero saw him as a threat. The plan was careful. It happened during a royal dinner. Britannicus asked for his wine to be cooled with water, but the water was poisoned. Locusta, the same poisoner who killed Claudius, had done the job. The boy drank, and seconds later began shaking violently. His face turned blue. His body twisted. He collapsed to the floor, choking on his own breath. Guests screamed in horror. Nero kept eating. Calmly, he said, "It's just one of his seizures." Britannicus had suffered from epilepsy, so it was believable. The boy died, and Nero simply had his body carried away. The dinner continued. This was just the beginning. For the first few years of his rule, Nero was kept in check by 3 people: his mother Agrippina, his tutor Seneca, and the army commander Burrus. Historians would later call this period the 5 good years of Nero. But Agrippina didn't bring her son to power just to see others rule him. She demanded a say in everything. She wanted to sit beside him in public, to have her face on coins. She was still trying to control him. Nero hated it. He was young and craved freedom. He wanted to race chariots, sing in theaters, and sleep with whoever he liked. None of this pleased his mother. The breaking point came when Nero fell in love with a woman named Papaya Sabina. She was the opposite of Agrippina, beautiful and manipulative. She told Nero, "You're not a real emperor if your mother still controls you." Agrippina, feeling threatened, began supporting Britannicus openly again. That was it. Nero decided she had to die, but killing his mother wasn't easy. She was loved by the army and protected by guards. She also had food tasters and antidotes to avoid poison. Nero needed a clever plan. He had a special boat, built a boat with a roof designed to collapse and make it look like an accident at sea. He invited her to a festival, treated her like royalty, and sent her home on the trap boat. When the roof collapsed, it crushed her companion instead. Agrippina jumped into the sea and swam for her life. The crew tried to kill her with oars, but she escaped in the darkness. Wet, cold, and gasping, she made it to shore. She had survived. Nero panicked. She would now strike back. He had only hours. That night, he sent soldiers to finish the job. They found Agrippina in her villa, soaked and exhausted. She was writing letters, trying to rally her allies. When the soldiers came, she didn't run. She stood tall and said, "Strike my womb first, the place that gave birth to such a monster." They hesitated. This was the daughter of Germanicus, the sister of an emperor, the mother of the current ruler. But the order was clear. They killed her again and again. The blades came down. Agrippina the younger was dead. When Nero heard the news, he didn't cry. He felt relief. The woman who made him emperor was finally gone. He was free, but this murder would follow him for the rest of his life. The people of Rome might accept political killings, but killing your own mother, That was a sin against family. And the gods. Rumors spread fast. Some said Nero went to see her naked corpse, laughing and pointing at her flaws. Whether true or not, the story fit the monster he was becoming. Nero had crossed a line he could never uncross, and his darkest days were still ahead. After Agrippina's death, Nero was free, completely free. But freedom doesn't always bring peace. For Nero, it brought something darker. The man who once refused to sign death warrants had now killed his own brother and mother. And with each murder, his fear grew. He started seeing enemies everywhere. At first, Nero tried to distract himself. He threw festivals. He hosted wild parties where wine flowed like rivers and gold was thrown to the crowd. He sang, acted, and played the lyre on stage like a common performer. For Romans, it was shocking. Emperors were supposed to be gods, not entertainers. But Nero didn't care. He loved the applause more than he loved ruling. His teacher, Seneca, was horrified. The wise old man had tried for years to guide Nero, but now he saw a monster growing up. He couldn't stop it. The army general, Burrus too, saw it coming. But Burrus died, some said poison, others natural causes. Either way, Nero lost the last man who held real power over him. With Burrus gone, Nero ruled alone. He surrounded himself with flatterers, artists, and sycophants. Anyone who disagreed with him was pushed aside or, worse. Even his wife, Octavia, wasn't safe. She was quiet, loyal, and deeply unhappy. Nero didn't love her. He wanted Papayude, the beautiful, ambitious woman who had once told him to kill his mother. But Rome loved Octavia. She was the daughter of Claudius, a true Roman lady. Getting rid of her would be dangerous. Still, Nero didn't care. He accused Octavia of adultery. No one believed it. When she was exiled, the people rioted. They filled the streets, shouting her name. Statues of Papaya were torn down. The city begged for Octavia's return. Nero panicked. For a moment, he allowed her to come back. But then, he made his decision. Soldiers were sent to her prison. They tied her wrists and cut her open. Her head was delivered to Papaya as a gift. Now, with no one left to stop him, Nero married Papaya. She became empress, but her life too would end in blood. One day, while pregnant, she made Nero angry. No one knows why. In a fit of rage, he kicked her in the stomach. She collapsed and later died. The unborn child died with her. Nero didn't weep. He had a statue made in her honor, then moved on. But outside the palace walls, the empire was falling apart. In 64 AD, a great fire broke out in Rome. It started in the shops near the Circus Maximus, narrow streets filled with wooden buildings. The fire raged for 6 days. When it was finally controlled, it started again. By the end, 10 of the cities, 14 districts were in ashes. People screamed. Their homes were gone, temples destroyed, families lost everything. And in the middle of this chaos, rumors spread. Nero had started the fire. Why? Some said he wanted to rebuild Rome in his city of marble, wide roads, and a massive golden palace. Others said he just wanted to watch it burn. One story said that while the city burned, Nero stood on a tower and sang about the fall of Troy, comparing Rome to the ancient city. Whether true or not, the people believed it. To stop the blame, Nero needed a scapegoat. He chose a small, strange group, the Christians. They were already hated. They refused to worship Roman gods. They met in secret and spoke of a new kingdom. They seemed dangerous to many Romans. so Nero blamed them. He arrested hundreds. Men, women, and children were tortured and executed. Some were torn apart by dogs. Others were crucified. Some were dipped in pitch, hung on poles, and set on fire to light Nero's garden at night. This wasn't justice. It was a message, a warning, and it worked for a time, but not forever. The Senate, once fearful of Nero, began to speak in whispers. Governors across the empire watched him with cold eyes. Rebellions began to stir. Then came the final blow. In 65 AD, a plot was discovered. It involved senators, soldiers, poets, even Nero's old teacher, Seneca. They planned to kill Nero and place a new emperor on the throne. The plot failed. Nero's spies found out. What followed was a bloodbath. Seneca was ordered to die. He opened his veins calmly, like a true stoic. His wife tried to follow him in death, but Nero's men saved her against her will. Poets, nobles, generals, anyone suspected was killed. Rome drowned in paranoia, but killing enemies didn't bring peace. The people still hated him. The army began to turn. And then, in 68 AD, the governor of Gaul, Julius Vindex, rebelled. He declared that Nero was unfit to rule. The news spread like fire. Other provinces joined. Armies began to march. In panic, Nero fled the palace. He begged the Senate for mercy. They ignored him. His guards deserted. His slaves ran. He had nowhere to go. He hid in a small villa outside Rome, surrounded by a few loyal freedmen. As the sound of soldiers grew closer, Nero knew the end had come. He couldn't do it himself, so he begged one of his men to help him die. With a trembling hand, a sword was raised. Nero pushed it into his own neck. His last words were, "What an artist dies in me." It was June 9th, 68 AD. The man who once ruled the world, who burned cities and killed his own mother, who sang on stages and built golden palaces, died like a coward, hiding in the dark. Rome would never be the same again. In the years after Nero's death, civil war broke out. For emperors rose and fell in a single year. The city he tried to remake fell into chaos, but his story lived on. Some remembered him as a monster. Others, strangely, missed him. Decades later, men would appear in the East claiming to be Nero. Returned from the dead, songs were written, myths were born. Was he evil, mad, or just a boy raised by power and poisoned by it? History doesn't give simple answers. But one thing is certain. Nero's story is not just about one man. It's about how absolute power, mixed with fear, loneliness, and ambition, can turn a human into a legend, one remembered for all the wrong reasons. After Nero's death, Rome was in chaos. There was no clear successor, no son to take the throne, no general ready to step up. What followed was a year so unstable, it would be remembered as the year of the 4 emperors. First came Galba, an old senator with a stiff neck and a colder heart. He promised to restore order, but he ruled with cruelty. He cut soldiers' bonuses and executed friends of Nero without trial. The people hated him. The army didn't trust him. His rule lasted just a few months before he was murdered in the streets by his own men. Next came Otho, a former friend of Nero and once married to Papaya. He promised peace, but war came instead. Vitellius, a general in the north, marched on Rome with his army. Otho tried to stop him, but after one bloody battle, he gave up and killed himself, hoping to avoid more bloodshed. Then came Vitellius. He was lazy, greedy, and let his men run wild in the city. Rome began to fall apart under his rule. But far in the east, another man was preparing to take power. Vespasian. Vespasian was a general, tough and experienced. He didn't care for luxury. He was not born noble, but he knew how to lead. His soldiers loved him. His plan was simple: take back Rome. His army marched west. Battle after battle, they crushed Vitellius' forces. Finally, they stormed the capital. Vitellius was dragged through the streets, beaten, mocked, and finally killed. His body was thrown into the Tiber River, and so, after a year of blood, Vespasian became emperor. Rome breathed again. Vespasian brought order. He rebuilt temples, restored discipline to the army, and ended wasteful spending. He laughed at jokes made about him. When he was dying, he reportedly said, "Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god." His rule began a new dynasty of Flavians. His son, Titus, became the next emperor. People remembered Titus for two things: the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and the completion of the Colosseum. In 79 AD, the ground shook near the Bay of Naples. A massive explosion ripped through the sky. Mount Vesuvius had awakened. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were buried under ash and stone. Thousands died in minutes. Those who survived were frozen in time bodies covered in ash, faces still filled with fear. Titus did what he could. He sent aid, opened his own palace to the homeless, and offered money to rebuild. The people loved him for it. A year later, he completed the Colosseum, a grand arena where gladiators fought, animals were hunted, and sea battles were staged. It was a gift to the people, a symbol of Rome's power. But Titus' rule didn't last. He died suddenly, some say poison, others illness. His brother, Domitian, took the throne. Domitian was clever, organized, and suspicious of everyone. He ruled like a king, not a servant of the Senate. He made people call him Lord and God. He built great monuments and strengthened the empire's borders, but he ruled with fear. He executed senators, exiled philosophers, and filled Rome with spies. People whispered about him in private, afraid to speak aloud. In 96 AD, after 15 years of paranoia, he was killed by his own servants in his palace. The Senate quickly declared him a tyrant and erased his name from public monuments. And so, the Flavian dynasty ended. But something strange was happening in Rome. Since the time of Nero, a small group had been growing, quietly, secretly. They met in underground rooms. They shared meals. They spoke of a man named Jesus who had died on a cross and risen again. They called him the Son of God. The Christians, Rome feared them. They refused to worship the emperor. They rejected Roman gods. They preached about love, forgiveness, and eternal life. They were different, and Rome didn't like different. For years, emperors used them as scapegoats, blaming them for fires, plagues, and unrest. But they kept growing. Even some Roman nobles began to convert. Soon, they could not be ignored. In the next century, Rome would fight a long battle with these people, battle of ideas, of faith, and of power. But back in the 2nd century, new emperors came, some wise, others brutal. Trajan ruled with strength and vision. Under him, Rome reached its greatest size. The empire stretched from Britain to the Persian Gulf. Roads, bridges, and cities appeared across the map. Rome was the heart of the world. After Trajan came Hadrian. He traveled the empire like no emperor before. In Britain, he built a wall, Hadrian's Wall, to keep out northern tribes. In Greece, he rebuilt temples. In Judea, he crushed revolts. Hadrian was a thinker, a lover of Greek culture, and a complex man. He ruled with both kindness and cruelty. Then came Antoninus Pius, a quiet ruler who kept the peace. Then Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, emperor. Marcus wrote about duty, fear, death, and the soul. His book, Meditations, became one of the greatest works of wisdom in history. But while he thought deeply, war raged on the empire's borders, and when Marcus died, he did something no emperor since Augustus had done. He passed the throne to his son. That son was Commodus. Commodus believed he was a god. He dressed as Hercules, fought as a gladiator, and renamed Rome after himself. His rule was a show, lavish, strange, and dangerous. The Senate feared him. The army laughed behind his back. In the end, his own inner circle strangled him in his bath. Rome was once again in crisis. But through all the emperors, good and bad, wise and foolish, Rome endured. Roads remained. Laws continued. Markets buzzed with trade. The empire lived on. But shadows were growing. To the north, Germanic tribes watched and waited. To the east, Persian kings planned invasions. Inside the empire, greed and power struggles weakened the state. And in the dark corners of cities, the Christians still gathered, still prayed, still believed Rome had ruled the world for centuries. But even the mightiest empires fall, and soon the eternal city would face its greatest test. But even as Rome stood proud, with temples shining and marble streets full of life, something inside was breaking. The power that once held everything together, order, discipline, and belief in Rome itself, was fading. In the countryside, farms were empty. Too many men had died in wars, and others left for the cities, chasing dreams that no longer existed. In the cities, the poor grew angry. Bread was harder to find. Jobs were fewer. Crime spread through alleyways. Like smoke, the army, once the pride of Rome, had become a tool for bribery. Generals promised gold to soldiers in exchange for loyalty. Emperors were no longer chosen for wisdom or strength. Now they were made or unmade by the sword. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors came and went. Some lasted only months. Others were killed by their own guards. Rome was bleeding from the inside, and all the while, in hidden rooms and quiet hearts, the Christian faith kept growing. These new followers did not fight. They did not worship statues. They helped the poor, cared for widows, and buried the dead even when no one else would. People started to notice. Some feared them. Others joined them. The emperors tried to stop it. Some ordered mass arrests. Others demanded sacrifices to Roman gods. Christians refused. Many were thrown to lions in arenas. Others were burned alive or tortured. But they didn't stop. They sang while dying. They prayed for their killers. And with every death, their numbers grew. By the early 300s, Rome faced a choice. It came with a man named Constantine. Constantine was a soldier, the son of a Roman general. He believed in signs, dreams, and destiny. One night before a great battle, he saw a strange light in the sky, a cross, glowing above the sun. Below it were the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his men to paint Christian symbols on their shields. They marched into battle, and after that, everything changed. In 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. It made Christianity legal. The killing stopped. Churches were built. Bishops came out of hiding. But Constantine went further. He didn't just accept the Christian God. He favored him. He gave land to the church. He called councils to settle disputes among believers. He wore purple robes and called himself God's chosen. And near the shores of the Bosporus, he built a new city, a second Rome. He called it Constantinople. It was cleaner, safer, and easier to defend. Marble streets stretched from golden gates to the sea. Churches gleamed under the sun. It became the heart of the Eastern Empire in one day. It would outlive Rome itself. Back in the West, the old capital was fading. The Senate still met, but it held no power. The emperors still wore crowns, but they obeyed generals. The empire was split east and west. In the east, things held together. Trade continued. Armies remained strong. Emperors ruled with order. But in the west, chaos returned. Tribes from beyond. The borders Visigoths, Vandals, Huns began to push inward. They were driven by hunger, by war, by hope. Rome tried to stop them, but its armies were tired, its gold was gone, and its people had lost faith. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. Rome was sacked. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, entered the Eternal City. For 3 days, his men looted temples, homes, and palaces. Flames rose into the night. Statues fell. The people wept. The world was shocked. Rome, the city that once ruled the earth, had been broken. It didn't end that day. The Western Empire limped on for a few more decades. But by 476 AD, the last emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by a Germanic chieftain. There was no grand battle, no final speech, just silence. The Western Roman Empire was gone, but Rome, its spirit, its laws, its dreams, was not dead in the East. Constantinople still stood strong. The Christian Church, now called Catholic, continued to grow. Roman ideas about justice, architecture, and government shaped the world. Even the enemies who brought Rome down copied it. They wore Roman armor, used Roman words, lived in Roman cities. Rome had fallen, but it had also become something greater, an idea, a ghost in stone and story, forever shaping what came next. And even today, when people speak of empires, of laws, of gods and glory, they speak in the shadow of Rome.